Hello. I want to welcome you again to There's Always a Way podcast. And as usual, I'm very excited about the privilege of having our guest today. And I say privilege because it's somebody that I've been able to get to know, who benefited from, profited from, been educated and schooled a little bit as well. So when I have the opportunity to interview or introduce our listeners to influencers, thought leaders, and men and women that are just in the arena. I mean, sleeves up, armor on, serving, fighting, defending, all the adjectives that we like to use for those of us that believe we have a faith worth sharing and a faith worth defending. Our guest today, David Gibbs, illustrates and epitomizes all of those. So, David, thank you for being with us today.
Oh, Jay, it's my honor. I appreciate the privilege to be on your podcast and to spend some time with you. I consider you a friend.
Well, thank you, buddy. President and General Counsel of the National Center for Life and Liberty. And that's a legal ministry. And I love that phrase, definition, if you will, a legal ministry that protects the rights of churches and Christian organizations nationwide. And we say nationwide, you got offices California, North Carolina, Texas, and of course in the homeland here in the state of Florida.
Yes, sir.
And not to mention, do you have offices there? But I was also looking at all the places that you're licensed to perform, that you are active to plead cases. And so this is one well-equipped brother, I can assure you. Graduate of Duke Law School, speaks at churches and conferences around the country, also has litigated cases as a trial attorney. I recommended you just recently, David, a couple prominent evangelicals having a significant difference on some agreed upon, or at least supposedly agreed upon issues, and they needed mitigation. And my advice was get godly counsel, but get someone or several, however it's best suited for that particular situation. So I recommend you a great deal. I want our listeners, I want our pastors, I want our elders, deacons, church leaders, youth pastors, all the issues that we have to face in this complicated time when it comes to us serving the Lord, defending what we believe in. So, David, without painting too broadly, your fingerprints are on issues from right to life to what ministries can do in political seasons, but also for the areas of foster care and the laws of the land. And so I want to ask you to break it down today for our listeners. But we always begin when I have key influencers and thought leaders by asking them the question. We call this There's Always a Way podcast. David, I want to ask you, as we've asked all of our guests to kick off our podcast, we call this There's Always a Way. It's become a life mantra and philosophy for me, but I've benefited a great deal by those that I respect. The first impression that comes to their mind when they read or hear the phrase, there's always a way.
Well, Jay, I think of what Thomas Edison said, there's always a better way. A way is going to occur. And I deal with people in sometimes their darkest moments. Generally, when people call a trial attorney, they're facing moments where their family might be in crisis, their church is blowing up, their loved one's in a hospital in a life and death situation. They might be facing abuse in their background. And so they're in trauma. And a lot of times they're like, what is the way forward? And the reality is there is a way forward. But I'm a big believer that there's always a better way forward, and you're better to choose the future than to let it just default upon you. And And so people come to me in crisis, and I always encourage them, whether it's in litigation, ministry, personally, trials come into your life and they are there for your making, not your breaking. And everybody has a choice. You go through crisis, bad situation, it could be business, personal, other trauma, car accident, you name it. You can grieve that loss and you can internalize it. You can say, I've been through some hard things, and the Lord will be there with you. You can minister within your own soul. But I always encourage people, much like Joseph in the Old Testament, take a situation that hasn't gone well for you and find a way where it could turn to something good for someone else. And I always find that the healthiest way forward is if you can take your trauma, your crisis, your bad experience, your pain, and then find a way to use your experience to help other people that are either going through something similar or to avoid that event. Now, again, if someone says, no, I just internalize and that's what I'm going to do, I respect that decision. But I always say there is a better way forward, which is if you can take the pain of your past and use it to be a blessing and a help to others, you can then let these experiences have the value in preventing difficulty for other people. And so that's always an approach. I love your heart and spirit on it. I mean, as I deal with situations across America, encouraging people that, there is going to be another day. Sometimes people come to me and it's the end of the world. It's just everything's over. I've lost my job, my ministry, my career. And the reality is with the Lord's grace, one foot in front of the other, you will see the next day. But again, as Edison said, I think there can be a better way.
Wow. Well, I love that. Thank you. I normally don't envy other individuals' mantra, but when I heard your personal mantra, I went, dude, that's pretty serious right there. Share that with our listeners, if you would.
What we call, and you're calling it our mantra, and it certainly is, they've kind of labeled it our ministry motto and a driving force. And it's simply, at the NCAA, we say, if it's wrong, we're going to fight it. And there's certainly a lot of wrong in our culture that we stand against. But if it's right, and there's a lot of good in our culture, we're going to fight forward. And so fighting for what is right, standing against what is wrong, that drives our organization in ministry, in the law, and in what we're trying to do. And that is our driving motto as we try to stand firm on those principles.
Well, I love the fact that you have a biblical basis for virtually everything you do. We're talking about someone who's argued before the Supreme Court. In fact, maybe, I can't think of another case where the argument had to be twice within just a matter of a week or 10 days or so, that things were going so fast and moving so fast. Of course, it was a life and death situation. I want to get to that. But from all the way from the Supreme Court to local school boards or church issues, the Matthew 25:40 verse that comes through loud and clear through your organization. Inasmuch as if you've done it unto one of these, the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. The words of Jesus. So I admire the way there's this biblical basis for these bold but yet very articulate and wise positions that you help the local church take, or faith communities take. We're a nonprofit ministry. Certain issues come up in our life that the local church doesn't face. But I'm just amazed at what all the National Center for Life and Liberty provides for churches and individuals of faith. I want to ask you about some of these conferences you do, and is there a way because I'm just sitting here when I went through all the information again on what some of the activities that you have, and I'm thinking of, man, I host a golf retreat for some of the largest church pastors in the nation every year, and I'm going, man, they need to meet. They need to know David personally. I know many of them will know the name, and many of them obviously will know the National Center for Life and Liberty. But I want them to get to know you personally, because some of the conferences that you do in local churches, and I assume now you're doing a lot virtually, but walk us through some of that as you will, and then I want to get into some of the specifics of the highlights in your ministry.
Well, Jay, we believe in the local church and in ministry. People say, what's the hope of America? And the hope of America is not in a courtroom. We work in different state houses, but it's not in the state house. We pray for our president, but how many understand it's not in the White House? It is in the church house. It is in ministry that each and every day, hero pastors and youth pastors and volunteers and leaders. And so right now, in terms of church ministry, what we do is we partner with churches, and our goal is to help keep them out of court. I tease my ministries keeping men of God like yourself out of jail. And so just seeing you on the podcast, I feel some degree of success. We've done well here. But when we do seminars and things, what we try to do is be practical. And our approach is a little different. A typical lawyer, insurance adjuster, risk manager, they can be very depressing. They'll be like, don't do it. And they just, they can demoralize you. You're like, I guess I should just shut down and stop. Our philosophy is we need your church to do more, not less. And so we talk about maximum ministry. I want SLU to do more. I want the churches to do more. I want God's people to do more. We need more ministry. But while we do maximum ministry, that can be done with minimal liability. Now, not no liability. Anything you do has a risk to it, and we know that. But to do it smartly. And so we help churches with their finances, or we help churches with their child protection policies. We believe, for example, if a child's safe anywhere, they ought to be safe at church. We've seen these horrific tragedies where shooters or bad actors have gone in and acted violently towards churches. And so we help ministries balance safety and security with being open to their community. And now here we are in our COVID world. We've watched unprecedented things go on. And while our government and while health leaders and medical professionals have been working diligently to save lives, our ministry made the decision that we were going to work diligently to save churches and ministries and to help people weather this and to figure out and to deal with what we're now calling a public health concern. That previously, you went to church, you got sick, that wasn't really a concern of the church. And now we're in a new culture where pastors and ministry leaders are being asked questions like, what did you do to protect your people from unnecessary spread of these highly contagious viruses and other things? And so we partner alongside churches. We help them accomplish their ministry. But again, our goal is they're the heroes. They're making the difference for God. And what we want to do is let them do everything they're called to do, but do it in a way that avoids unnecessary liability. And so our seminars, our training, our materials, we do have things that are available via video and other things to help churches. And so if we can be a resource to any of the churches that or any people that are listening to this podcast, they can just go to the website, ncll.org, and we would be honored to help their ministry.
ncll.org. And I promise everyone viewing or listening that that'll be a resource I think you'll want to go to time and time again. So much, David, to unpack with you. First of all, and I want to give the bulk of time in closing with advice that you have for the church and council in this last run-up, this politically charged season we're in, where you're afraid to tweet the wrong thing, you're afraid to somebody to like something that you said, and somehow you're painted in a corner by that brush, that we've got mobs running wild. So there's a lot of, and by the way, that term can apply in a lot of different areas, hysteria,
Yes, sir.
in the news, the media, but also in our actions and in our own local communities. So
Yes, sir.
I want to give plenty of time for you to be able to really challenge us on that and give us wise counsel as spiritual leaders. We know we can't remain in the corner, afraid to speak, afraid even to raise our hands. We've got to be leaders. And how do our people prepare for battle if the trumpet gives an uncertain term? But one of the things that, and again, it's just the way my brain works or doesn't work, but my way of looking at things, when I know that an individual like David Gibbs and your team have been in the fire, you've been in the arena, you have been in some of the most tense, consequential court decisions, battles, and obviously one of those that come to mind is the Terry Schiavo story. What a story! And when I found out you were the lead counsel for that, and that was some time ago, so some of our folks may have heard of it, but yet not be familiar with the details. But that was a life and death, time-sensitive issue. Tell us about that. And you went all the way
Well,
to the Supreme Court, as we said, with that. Yeah.
and Doctor, you have said it well. That case actually set a record, went to the Supreme Court twice in 10 days. So it was back in 2005. Hard to believe it's been now over 15 years. Number one news story in the world. Younger listeners will have to Google the name Terry Schiavo. It's going to be ancient history. I understand that. But for us middle-aged and up, we remember that story. It was a life and death drama that impacted our culture. And it was so heavily covered. Only issue in my lifetime that Rush Limbaugh and Jesse Jackson agreed upon. It brought together the left and the right. Barack Obama voted in support of Terry Schiavo. Hillary Clinton voted in support. Many Republicans standing for her life. It was an interesting time where all of Washington and all the world wanted to know what was America going to do with this disabled girl. And a lot of people have gotten misinformation. They look at the case and say, well, that girl was dead or brain dead. And I just want folks to know Terry was as alive as you and I. Number two, she wasn't dying. She had no cancer, Alzheimer's, there was no heart disease. And number three, she just needed food and water to stay alive. And tragically, what we as a nation did is we removed her food and water. That will generally kill you after 6 days. Terry went 13 days. And I think that showed a will to live and how healthy she was. But we allowed her to dehydrate and starve to death with the world watching. And tragically, now as we look back 15 years, there is a lie, and I call it a lie because it's from the devil and it violates what the scripture teaches. And I call it the quality of life lie. And what has permeated our culture, Doctor, since Terry Schiavo up until today, is that if you do not have sufficient quality of life, your life isn't worth living. Now, somebody says, well, I like quality of life. Well, I do too. I like to be able to speak and walk and move, and that's the blessing from the Lord. I don't want to lose quality of life. Those are wonderful blessings. But my value is not in my quality of life. Those are blessings given to me by God. My value is in the life itself, that I'm made in the image of God. And that gives me inherent value, whether I'm in a wheelchair or whether I can walk, whether I can speak or whether I'm mute, whether I can see or whether I'm blind. My value is not in my quality of life. My value is the fact that God has made me in his image and given me life. And sadly, our courts and our culture, and even many Christians, and I challenge pastors also, be careful that we don't take the blessing of quality of life, which we all want, and somehow convert that to that is the value of life. God can have tremendous purpose. I think of my friend Johnny Erickson Tata and how she is, 4 hours a day to get dressed and ready and in constant pain. And that dear woman suffers so much on a regular basis. We'd all agree that her quality of life is very low. But the reality is, look at the ministry, the mission, what she's been able to do. And so we just have to be careful that the values of this world don't violate what you already stated as a life verse for me in Matthew 25, verse 40. What we've done under the least of these, we've done to God himself. And I believe as a nation, what we did to Terry Schiavo, we did to God himself. We need to recognize whether it's the unborn, whether it's the disabled, whether it's the elderly, whether it's the poor, whether it's the kid that nobody cares about. You know what? The reality is what we've done unto those that can't do anything back for us, we've done to God. I warn my pastor friends, be careful. Obviously, we need givers. We need successful people. We want people that can make a difference. But watch that your life doesn't just turn into win-win, which is very American in our culture. I'll scratch your back, you scratch my back. I'm in, how much do I get paid? And I think the Bible teaches, if you're going to live your life that way, I call that a life of negotiated selfishness. What's in it for me? How does this work?
I love
And
it.
at that point, negotiate your best deal, because that's all you're going to get. But when God says, you reached out to the least of these, you went in and helped somebody who couldn't do anything back for you. You reached in and helped somebody in that nursing home. You did something for that kid nobody cared about. You invested in that abuse victim that people thought was crazy. You poured into the least of these. God goes, you know what? I saw that. And I, God, will reward you for all eternity. And so certainly we have to be smart about our ministries. We need to work with all people, but be careful that you don't just get into looking for what people can do back for the ministry, but really say, Lord, open my eyes. The least of these are all around us. But if we're not careful, we get so busy, we don't have time to even see them.
Wow. Man, well said. How does one become? We know there are many lawyers. We've heard the lawyer jokes and how many lawyers there are in the world, and there are many. And
Yes, sir.
Obviously, student leadership, we have thousands of students that earnestly are seeking a calling, a field, where do I spend my life? And what is it God's calling me to do? And, I'm amazed at the role that law school has played in the life of those that are in 50 different fields. But what is there about a young person such as yourself? When did you realize I wanted to be involved with law? And then secondly, how we know the process itself, law school by nature, is not going to be where you get some of these biblical insights and faith and illuminations that you've had. So take us a little bit on your journey. Obviously, you're a man of faith. Obviously, you're very qualified, legal, and you've prepared yourself. But how did all that come together?
Well, and I'll be very honest, Doctor, and I want to say to you, there's a lot of lawyers out there that make a living and it's a business. I never went to law school with the business mindset. I always went wanting to help other people. I'm probably a little bit of a frustrated social worker. I like getting into problems, and the law empowers you to be able to make a difference. Now, for some of the younger listeners of this podcast, what you have to do is you have to go to college, and you need to be in an accredited school. You need to have a solid school. You need to have good grades. And once you graduate from college, you take the LSAT, which is the law school admissions test, and that's a score to grade your logic and your reading and your critical thinking skills. And then you apply to law schools. And then I encourage people, if you are pursuing this, to go to the law school, obviously the best law school you can get in, but watch your debt. Some dear people have just borrowed and borrowed and borrowed, and they then come out of law school with hundreds of thousands, some of them $500,000 in debt. And you can go find a good job, or you can find a way to try to pay that down. But that is a very much a life limiter. You can't go into public service. You can't go into government work. You can't go into ministry work. You're going to have to work the expensive commercial jobs to be able to afford that. So I tell people, somebody says, well, I can get into this school, but it's going to cost me $50,000 a year, but I can go to this school for a few thousand. I always encourage them, watch your debt, because it really does impact your future. Then after you graduate from law school, you take the bar exam in the state where you want to serve, and you can then be a practicing lawyer. Now, a lot of people go to law school and they go into government, they go into business. It's an excellent degree to do a lot of different things, even if you're not going to be a practicing attorney. And people in their minds, young people in particular, come to me and say, well, I want to be a lawyer. I want to argue. I want to yell. And I always tell folks that's very important. You got to be verbal at some level, but probably the most important thing you can learn to do as a aspiring lawyer is learn how to write well. And we're in a culture right now where, kids text and tweet and can't even spell. And law school is largely a written experience. The bar exam is significantly written. Lots of cases now, because of the expense, and I know with Zoom and other things, some of this is changing, but they even just say file the written arguments, and then there is no oral argument. And I'm verbal. I enjoy speaking and articulating a position. But I would tell young people, work on your writing. And the way you do that, read good authors, not all, textbooks, read some fiction, read some biographies, read some authors that are gifted. That will improve your writing. But then you need to write. So work on, when you do have a paper or task at school, think about writing, think about journaling, think about writing articles. Developing that skill will let you succeed in whatever area of law you go into. And it'll also help you in life, because we know in today's world, whether it's media, online or otherwise, being able to express yourself in written word is important. And then I would warn people that go into legal education. I've watched a lot of folks go the wrong way. And I'll tell you like a little trick they do in law school. Okay. You get all prepared, and let's say it's a fake criminal case, and you're going to be the prosecutor. You're going to say this guy did bad things and he should be convicted. And then the other side's all prepared. This guy's innocent, he didn't do it, there's no evidence. And so you're all prepared. You go into your classroom, you're ready to go. And the professor says, okay, Mr. Gibbs, I've made a decision. I want you to defend the guy. And the other side that was all prepared to defend him, I want you to prosecute him. And you're like, wait, professor, I got all ready. I'm going to be the prosecutor. And what they try to teach you, and you got to be real careful with this, is that there is no right or wrong. There's just two sides, one side or the other side. And you can just argue either side. And for many Christian people, that can be very faith disconcerting, because instead of saying, wait a minute, the Bible's true, Jesus is the Savior, this is what I believe, this is right, this is wrong, you begin to think everything in life is just two sides, and everything can be argued from one side or the other. And I would just encourage people going through law school. We know in litigation, commercial endeavors, and other things, that can always be the case. But there are certain situations where there's a right side and a wrong side because of what Scripture says. And so making sure that as you go through the legal education process, that you stay strong in your faith, you stay good in a local church, that you immerse yourself in the Word of God and Christian principles like SMU and other great organizations encourage, to make sure that your worldview doesn't get disrupted by the legal education process.
Wow. Sound advice, sound wisdom. One of the things that I've learned from you is you always seem to remember some of the individuals in the fight, in the journey, in the litigation, in the moment, that really did go the second mile to help, really did something. And you were sharing some of the backstory with me in a conversation, and I don't, obviously I never would want you to violate any confidentiality, but there were some moments where public opinion mattered in the Terry Schiavo case. Obviously, this was being played out before the nation. I mean, the whole North American world, the whole Western world at least, was covering this. How would we resolve this? But you shared with me a couple times where a pastor made a significant phone call, or someone that was on vacation came back in. And I've always been fascinated by the relationships and the human element in some of these great moments that never really appear in a document.
That's correct. And Doctor, I'm a big believer that as Christians, we need to try to help each other. And so I'm not afraid when I go into a town to talk with the pastor or a group of pastors and say, gentlemen, I need your help. I need the church's help, because, this is your community and we need to do this together. And they'll have wisdom and connections. And the Terry Schiavo case had a seminal moment. The state had ruled against her. She was dying. And as many people will remember, back in 2004 and 5, the Congress passed an emergency bill to try to save her life. And that bill did not become law until President George Bush at that time actually signed it. And we knew every minute was important, because she was without food and water, and it was a very stressful moment. And we received word that President Bush was in Crawford, Texas, at his ranch, which it was a weekend, and he certainly had every right to be there. But one of the questions was the bill going to be flown to him? Would it sit on his desk for 2 days until he returned on Monday? And so we were worried about, every day was a day of concern. And so I had the privilege of graduating from Liberty University and had stayed connected with Dr. Jerry Falwell, who, as many of your listeners know, is now in heaven, but a great Christian leader, pastor of the Thomas River Baptist Church, and a strong spokesperson, but also very much in the political connection. And so I reached out to Dr. Falwell and hit his voicemail. He was gracious enough to, allow me to contact his cell phone. I said, Dr. Falwell, I don't have any contacts with Karl Rove, who was intimate chief of staff at that time with Bush. And I said, we need this bill signed. And if there's anything you could do to help me, I'd sure appreciate it. And I don't know that I expected Dr. Falwell to do anything. Well, I later found out, and I received a voicemail from Dr. Falwell. He was in the hospital. He had pneumonia, was very, very sick. And I got this voicemail back, and it was cough, cough, cough. Jerry Falwell had that booming voice. David, Jerry, talk to Karl. President's flying back. Cough, cough, cough. I'm in the hospital with this thing. I need to get over it. But go ahead, save that girl. And boom, end of voicemail. And Dr. Jerry Falwell had asked, and the president agreed to fly back. And so essentially in the middle of the night, President Bush, at the request of Dr. Falwell, signed that bill that then allowed us to walk into federal court at 1 a.m. in Tampa. And so I just think about, those men that could easily have been too busy. Here I am, just a young lawyer, and Dr. Falwell's he's sick, he's in the hospital. There's always excuses as to why, you could be busy or this isn't my problem. But it showed me that, Dr. Falwell and other men like him, they were the real deal. When they could, they used their influence, they used their ministry, they used their time and invested in the lives of others. And again, Dr. Falwell always impressed me that, he had an amazing memory. He'd remember students and names. He was gifted in that way. But he could walk up to a student and say, how's your mom? And that student would be just floored that he remembered that mom had just had cancer or just had a trauma. And so that being invested in the lives of people, it always reminds me, a man that could sit with a president could also show concern to a college student. And that is really the kind of person I think we should all try to be.
No question. And he's one of my personal heroes, and privileged to do a lot of life with him and learn much from him. This is a perfect segue, David, to what I really want to probably need to do 3 podcasts with you, but in this day and age, this moment in time where I think the church has got to make a stand, there is always the 501c3 issues, nonprofits, regarding issues of faith and politics. And we've been told, I have to deal with this at our SLU 201 in DC every year with thousands of students, but we're always taught, there's a wall of separation. The church cannot be involved in political things. And certainly in this day and age, that tension's being increased. In fact, folks are telling us we can't go to church, we can't sing if we do go to church, and churches need to be closed. So there's a lot of all of that. I know you're in the middle of it. I know the National Center for Life and Liberty is in the middle of that, and you're helping churches navigate that world. But you shared something, and I want to just give the time to you to share what you think we need to know in these political times. Are we able to express concerns? Are we able to talk about moral issues? Are we able to share how I'm going to vote, even for what it's worth? I'm tempted to say it's a sin not to vote. But with my personality, I'm tempted to go, it's a sin not to vote this way. I want to kind of be there with them and make sure they fill the form out correctly. So you had a rule that helped me during some Q&A one time on time and dime. And so
Yes.
I'm gonna intrigue everybody with that phrase, time and dime, and then ask you, how does that apply to us in this moment in time?
Well, first of all, and I want to totally agree with you, Doctor, we need the voice of the church to be bold. We need clarion voices. And I encourage pastors that you have a lot more liberty than you may realize. Your First Amendment, your free speech, your freedom of religion. So the reality is, if you want to do it, you can probably do it. The limitation is in political campaigns, and that's where candidates are running against each other. So if there's a marriage issue, a moral issue, a gambling issue, a traffic issue, a law enforcement issue, an Israel issue, you can speak unlimitedly. Churches can preach from the platform and say, vote for Amendment 1, not Amendment 2. So on any moral issue, there is zero limit. Okay. But then when you come to, we have a campaign right now, the presidential leadership appears to be Mr. Trump versus Mr. Biden. That's not yet been certified, but let's presume that's the election. The limit is just what you mentioned, church dime and church time. Don't take church money to fight a candidate or to promote a candidate at the expense of the other. And don't take church time to do it. But as a personal individual, on your own dime and on your own time, pastors can be involved, ministry leaders can be involved, nonprofit leaders can be involved, and we can help you understand all of the guidelines on that. But for this podcast, I just want you to know you've got more liberty than you may realize. Now, let me tell you a matrix that we run everything through, whether it's litigation, principles, and I'd encourage the listeners to think about this for life. Anytime you take a stand, number one, make sure you're right. Make sure you've got the right stand. And I would challenge pastors, it needs to line up with the Word of God. It needs to line up with the facts. You know, sometimes pastors get very upset and they don't have their facts straight. Or somebody's all mad because they got to wear a mask into a grocery store. And please understand, you know, you may be irritated with that, but is that really a biblical stance? So make sure that you are right, okay? Number two, let's do it the right way. We can be pro-life, I'm pro-life, and some individual says, well, maybe we should bomb an abortion clinic. Well, hold on, time out. That's the wrong way, right? That's violence, that's murder. We said we're pro-life, now somebody may die. And everybody would agree, okay, that person has got maybe the right position, but they're doing it the wrong way. So we certainly want to make sure that we do the right stand, we do it the right way. But then number three, and do I challenge this from our highest levels of leadership to churches, to others, to families, make sure number three, you do it with the right spirit. Your spirit is your testimony. And I think sometimes Christians get disengaged from the entire political process or the entire government process or the entire courtroom process because they don't like the spirit. But I would challenge folks that you can take the right stand, you can do it the right way, but you can maintain a right spirit. And a right spirit is your testimony. It's what the Lord can bless. A lot of times people will see me on television or they'll hear a radio or a podcast like this, and they won't remember exactly what I said, but they'll remember the spirit that they received as they were listening and the tone and the approach. And so I encourage folks, we are not activists. We are Christians. We are not trying to be political troublemakers. We're trying to be people of faith. We just want to humbly live our faith day by day, make a difference. We want to have maximum ministry. We want to make a difference. We want to do it with minimal liability. But that, right stand done the right way with a right spirit is something I challenge every church in crisis, every family in crisis, every ministry leader. Filter your positions through that, and I believe the Lord will bless what you're doing.
So I would be in a position, or a pastor would be in a position to share that we believe this election may be one of the most critical. I know that hype, we use that hype way too often. We cry wolf way too often.
We do.
But I really do sense this is a consequential moment. I really do believe that many of the things that will determine our future are at play now. So I've been telling everybody, I believe America is a jump ball, and
Yes.
whoever wants it and whoever will pay the price will be able to determine how long the game's going to go on. So
well, and Doc, let me throw in quickly, because I know we're getting close to out of time. Churches can register people to vote. Okay, so make sure everybody in your church is registered. Have tables in the back, sign people up. You might be shocked at how many people in your church are not registered. Register everybody. Then number two, make sure your people actually vote. Churches can drive people to the polls. Churches can help people. So churches can be very involved in the voting process. Then number three, make sure your people vote intelligently, okay? A national election, people will hear a lot about Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden, and a lot of times they've made their decisions off what they hear. But you get down to the school board, you get down to the lower level elections, county commissioners, people that have huge influence, and people go, oh, Bob versus Sally. Well, I'll vote for Sally because she's a girl. And they don't understand Bob's a good Christian, he's a deacon in a church, and Sally's an activist. Everything in the church world because they're not intelligent in their voting. So register, make sure they vote intelligently. Then encourage them, number four, to vote their values of life, values of liberty, values of standing with Israel, values of limited government, values of things that matter to us. Now, somebody says there's two candidates, Mr. Gibbs, and they are both not perfect. And you know what? That's every election. Jesus has yet to run for office in America, so you're never going to have a perfect candidate. But I always tell folks to vote for lesser of evil. And somebody says, well, but lesser of evil means what? Well, if you vote lesser of evil, you got lesser of evil. If you don't vote at all or vote the other way, worser of evil wins. And so you always want to vote lesser of evil. Don't throw your vote away. Don't sit home. A little protest of non-vote will let the less desirable candidate win. So somebody says, well, this candidate's done some things I don't like, or they've said some things I don't totally agree with, but I believe they're the lesser of evil. Get out and vote, and we have the privilege in this country to vote. Let's not forego it by being indifferent.
Wow. Well, I'm a big believer, out of the room, out of the deal, number one. So in that, I'm talking about access and influence. And you and I earn the right to have access in in some of these opinions that are being shaped by how much we've invested in the lives of our community. I believe our credibility gives us a platform. And I believe that, and I love the way you said it. I'm a big believer that, the Good Samaritan's a great example, and I'm trying to figure out, the best way to use that with this election coming. And I'll just bounce it off of you in closing, because I'm just so grateful for your keen mind, but your strong anchor on the Word of God. So it's a pretty good combination there. But, we do have a man in the ditch, and he's half dead. And we don't know which half's dead, but he's half dead. He is bleeding. He is dying. This is a big deal. And we have several people that walk by and see him in the ditch. Now, those are upstanding people. Those were good people. And they were probably in a hurry to go on and do something at the temple. We know one of them, is a Pharisee. One of them is a scribe or a legal, person. But yet, usually there's strong biblical connection with their activities. And so, there's a lot of people that walk by that have a nice tone, or they're pleasant, but they walk by. They didn't do anything to help the man in the ditch. And then somebody comes along, and we're told he's a Samaritan, and that has all those connotations. But what did he do? He got in the ditch, and he rolled up his sleeves, and he lifted the man out and did his best to take care. So I have no doubt the two went back to wherever they were hurrying off to that couldn't be involved, maybe even spoke on, we need to help people in the ditch. And they may have been articulate about it. And maybe that person that jumped in the ditch to help them, maybe he was pretty angry about the people that did that and voiced that. How could anybody do? But the point is, I'm a scoreboard guy. I look at the actions. I want somebody who's going to do what they can to make America strong, do what they can to help our poor, do what they can for prison reform or pro-life or Israel, all these issues you talk about. So I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but
well, I'll say this. I like the analogy. Let me tell you where I pull the analogy in. That stretch of highway historically was laden with thieves and was high risk. Okay.
Blood, right?
Just the fact that you were walking alone put you at risk. Most people would go in groups to avoid the thieves and others. So the people walking by were the most qualified, and you would have thought they would be the ones that would do it. But they would have had to put themselves at risk. It would have slowed them down. It would have stopped them. They knew thieves were in the area. And so self-interest drove them on. It's really better for me to get through this. Boy, I'm sorry to see him in the ditch, but I could be at risk. What the Samaritan did, okay, number one, he had compassion on him. You got to open your eyes to the problem before you care. Then he put himself at risk because he's now on foot. He's now put the guy on his animal, and it cost him money, cost him time. He left him there at the inn. He left more money. I mean, you look at all the sacrifice that guy did. A lot of people in America would have said, nah, I'd have just stayed moving. It's really better for me to just get there, get my business done, and not put myself at risk. That Samaritan model, the least of these philosophy. I'm willing to have compassion and invest in this man who's not going to be able to do anything back for me. And he demonstrated what the Lord wanted us to learn. And so I would encourage people, you know what, our kids are in a ditch, our country's in a ditch. There's a lot of things that you can look around and you may say, well, my job, my career, my life, what I want, it seems like just to stay moving. But I would encourage you to open your eyes and to have compassion and to be willing to put yourself out, even if it costs you time, money, endeavor. It's worth it because that's what the Lord will indeed bless. And by the way, that's what built America. America was not built on selfishness. It was built on sacrifice. Wow. Our founding fathers, who, by the way, mostly were elite, successful business, corporate. I mean, they had the plantations, they had the farms, they had the lifestyle. And you know what? Many of them died paupers. Many of them were hunted down as traitors. Many of them watched where their families were murdered and put to death. But they said, you know what? There's something bigger than us when it comes to liberty and freedom and this country. And they sacrificed incredibly. And so I would just encourage people to think about, we're not being asked to sacrifice at that level, but be willing to open your eyes and give of yourself to make a difference. There's a lot of people in the ditch that need our help.
Well, David Gibbs, thank you. Very, very grateful for what the National Center for Life and Liberty does, llc.org. Is that correct? NCLL, National Center for Life and Liberty.org. I think if they're watching, I stuck it in my name line just to be easy for folks. But in that vein, we are available to churches and ministry leaders. And Doctor, let me say this, your leadership, your voice, I mean, I'm honored to be on your podcast. I consider you a hero and a man of God that I'm just so privileged to know you. And thank you for your faithfulness and what you've done. And again, I would encourage folks that listen to this podcast regularly that this man has a lot of wisdom, and I'm just a better person to get to spend some time with you. Well, thank you, Dave. You're most gracious. I want to encourage all of our church leaders and faith leaders, check out a church legal health seminar. Find out those resources. Find out what we need to know, the church's position on biblical marriage and sexuality. These are confusing days. Even how you adopt children, children's home, every aspect of how we know as a church to care for families in need, families in crisis, children in crisis. All of that today is gotten, as the British would say, a sticky wicket. So what is the church's position on sexuality and on biblical marriage? What about our tax exemption? Those are valid questions, and there'll always be someone who raises that. So this is your resource, critical ministry documents. We got to make sure our bylaws are in order and we can find them. We got to make sure that our policies ensure safety, the child safety policies, church emergency response. And whoever dreamed we'd have to know all these issues about a virus and what we're doing and defending what our church does, or keeping our people safe at church. I mean, financial integrity, plagiarism. We went through a deal recently in our ministry you were such a help with, David, on plagiarism. Somebody come along, just say, we're going to do this and take this, just clean the shelves out, if you will, you know. And then how do you protect your ministry assets, on and on. This is a oasis of relief, assistance, wisdom, encouragement, the National Center. So I want you to take advantage of that resource. And David Gibbs, thank you, buddy, for all you're doing. Keep
My honor.
fight.
Thank you, and appreciate your voice and your leadership, Doc.
Thank you. This is Always a Way podcast. And remember, let me just quote Dr. Gibbs again. I love this. If it's wrong, fight it. If it's right, fight for it. Somehow, man, I wish plagiarism, but anyway, it gets complicated. Because
Hey, you can borrow it anytime. You, Doc, I love it.
All right, man. God bless.
Thank you.